Hello everyone and welcome back to Crypt D&D for the Ravion campaign. The last time we left off, our party had successfully made their way to the elven village of Thala, Lemba's hometown, and after a brief meeting with the Council of Elders, they convinced the head elder, Eldry, a winter eladrin with a bad attitude, to tell Lemba's cousin Alden the location of the mysterious cave where Lemba was discovered. They accomplished this by showing her one of the teardrop-shaped gemstones that they had been collecting and dreaming about so far in the campaign. Spending the night in Lemba's childhood home, the group now awakes in the village of Thala. As the party comes to in their respective sleeping chambers, Lothric took a moment to gather a number of cookies that he and Alden had made the night before and prepare them for the road as snacks for the group. Lemba, before awaking, suffered from a dream very similar to the ones that Flawed had been having until he died. An old crone, her face in the darkness, appeared for her. Curious as to where Lemba was and inviting her to join her to make a deal. She needed something from her. She wouldn't say what, but she needed something, and she invited Lemba to join her in the Mistkeep. Now, as Lemba awoke, she heard the chuckle of this old crone from her dreams, and a statue that she had taken from Flawed that seems to depict the woman that she had spoken to, sitting on her chest as she awoke. After briefly discussing how to procure breakfast, specifically some sort of chicken, or some other sort of meat, for X, the party was struggling since the people of Thala are vegetarian. It's hard to be a collection of druids and turn into animals that you will then eat. So, after briefly discussing this breakfast and procuring what little they could for squirrels or something for X, they found word as they were leaving, as the village was in chaos, that something seems to have caused Eldry, the Winter Eladrin woman, to become catatonic. Hitting the road in a rush to avoid any repercussions for their presumed cause of Eldry's suffering, the party hurried onwards to the cave that they had found Lemba in years and years before. They left Thala behind, traveling through the tall redwood forest, watching both a seemingly familiar raven as it travels with the party, similar to Flawed's raven, as X took a moment to bond with large tortoises, these giant moss tortoises, along the side of the road as they traveled. Lemba, seeking to capitalize on this moment of tenderness from this otherwise brooding dragonborn, turned promptly into a creature that she has seen in years earlier, known as a leafant. A small green elephant-type creature that has large leaf-like ears and typically follow these large tortoises around and blend into the leaf litter of the forest floor. Not quite scavengers, they benefit from the messy eating habits of these giant tortoises, picking up the scraps of these much larger plants and enjoying them as they follow the tortoises through their kind of slow migration routes of the forest. So, Lemba, turning into a leafant, ran down to where X was standing, feeding one of the tortoises with a small handful of ferns, and rubbed against X's boot. X, picking her up, thought she was extremely cute, before Lothric smiled and yelled that it was actually Lemba as a leafant, to which point X then looked at Lemba and quietly set her back down on the ground. Continuing on, the party took a moment to experiment with storing Jade within her own bag of holding. Jade, at this point, has been struggling as not quite the most athletic person of the group, with long and difficult travel. So, as they continued on dumping her into the bag and pulling her out for air every now and then, Jade heard something from deep within the bag as she held her breath and rustled around within, making noise. And hearing this, she leapt from the bag in an attempt to escape whatever was in there with her, quickly tying the lid shut so it could not be opened. She had heard of a bedtime story from her childhood, telling of a cowardly adventurer that fled into his bag of holding to escape danger, never returning except as a mysterious and ruthless bagman that snatches travelers from their sleep through their bags of holding. As they finished this journey, the party then came to a mouth of the cave with a warm water spring trickling through the underbrush as a creep of giant moss tortoises grazed in the warmth of the stream's steaming water. Spending the night outside the cave entrance, the party enjoyed the warmth of the fire against the chill of the night. The most perceptive people on watch noticing the bag of holding that Jade had been put into moving slightly on its own. Though tied shut, nothing came from the encounter. The next morning, the party entered the cave, noticing as they traveled across a bridge the rhythmic explosion of a geyser spraying hot water on them from deep within the earth below them. Continuing into the first chamber, the party found 3 statues holding scepters, one being a tiefling woman with a scepter capped with a humanoid claw, the second being a seemingly teenage young boy wielding a scepter with a knight's chess piece on top, and finally a young tiefling girl that looks remarkably like Lemba if she were younger, wielding a scepter with a crescent moon at its top. The apparent puzzle being solved already, the door exiting the chamber was already opened. Traveling down further, the party entered a long, slowly curving tunnel with one side open to a massive drop in the chamber, where apparently the geyser had been erupting from. Hot water occasionally erupting and burning them as they traveled. They passed 3 repeating statues through this chamber's tunnel. Statues of a werewolf man, a female knight in full plate armor wielding a sword, and a woman in flowing silk robes with a moon-shaped sickle. Stepping onto a pressure plate, the sword-wielding knight statue swung down, just barely grazing Lemba, Lothric, and Alden. Taking some damage and marking the pressure plate in their minds, they avoided it for the rest of the party, continuing on to the second chamber. This chamber held 3 more statues. The 3 statues that seemed to be in the hall before them. The werewolf man, the knight, and the woman with the sickle. Each with their palms extended outwards with places for 2 circular tablets within them. Many tablets littered the room with depictions of the different gods on them, scattered throughout, many of them having colored borders, with 2 matching up per color. The party then collected them and, placing them within the statue's palms, tested them and found that, at very least, for the Moonlight Sickle woman, the Midnight Dancer, and the Twilight Huntress matched for her, as with the Knight's figure, the Crimson Tactician, and the Scarlet Maiden. Moving onwards now through a trapdoor that opened in the center of these 3 statues, the party struggled as at the bottom of this 30-foot drop seemed to be a pressure plate that shut the trapdoor behind them, popping the tablets back out of the palms. In a creative solution to this problem, they froze the tablets into place and lowered Sudi within and into this tablet area where she stepped on the pressure plate, and they heard the grinding of hidden mechanisms breaking and straining against this frozen ice. Hurrying onwards, they continued through this 30-foot drop and into this one final hallway. Pockmarked with hot water and different minerals, they also found small collections of bones across the floor, and at the very end of this slightly curved tunnel, a man leaning against one of two stone braziers beside a door. This man was Lumba's uncle, and her cousin Alden ran to him and in a moment took care of him to hopefully bring him back. And while the man was weak, he was not dead, which was good. Standing now, otherwise trapped in this chamber, the party investigated the two braziers. Each brazier seemed to have different red stains in the center, and words along the side in Celestial said, "Let the blood of the champion burn bright." Lemba, taking this to mean that she must shed her blood, cut her hand and dripped it into this brazier. The one on the right blazing forth into a bright flame, as Lothric cut his palm and put it into the other brazier. As the blood sat there and did not alight, Lemba turned and dripped some of her own in, which then caused it to light up. The door opened, and they were able to enter the final chamber. This final chamber seemed to be where the actual geyser was. And standing on one side, they could look and see between intermittent blasts of this geyser's power 3 sarcophagi across the way. As they made their way across this bridge, the party then found that there was something in the heated waters below them, as a massive metal-coiled serpent wrapped itself across this bridge before them, waiting. Lemba stepped forward, and being a champion of one of the different sarcophagi within this cave, the serpent allowed to let them pass. Moving forward now, they found 3 sarcophagi, each one decorated with a very familiar few patterns. The first of either the werewolf man, for one, or the knight in armor, and then finally the silk-robed woman with a sickle, and then an anvil on each, and then 2 different figures resembling the different gods. The one that Lemba gravitated towards was the moon-shaped sickle woman, in which she recognized the 2 figures to be the Midnight Dancer and the Twilight Huntress. Investigating these sarcophagi, Lemba then entered and shut the lid. As she did, a carving on the inside of the lid seemed to glow slightly, and at this point, and this happened with a few of my players, they were given one example, one casting of the Contact Other Plane spell, sort of modified to fit the different vessel that it was stored within. From here, Lemba was able to speak to this apparent goddess, ask her questions. Lothric then jumped into the werewolf man sarcophagus and asked his own, and Sudi into the knight's sarcophagus and asked her own. Each one escaping the sarcophagus afterwards with little trouble, though they had gone mad, speaking a long dead language of the gods. One that, if comprehended, drove the others to madness and made them struggle against their better mortal natures. So, at this point, the party then finally made their way out through a back tunnel and back out for an evening of rest near the hot spring at the mouth of the cave, where they tended to their rescued uncle, Lumba's rescued uncle, and tied their newly maddened companions to different redwood trees so as to allow them to recover, in the hopes that it would not be long before they returned to themselves again. So, that's it for the Session 10 recap for the Ravian campaign. If you're liking the story so far, please, by all means, subscribe, ring the bell. You'll get details on when we post our next video. If you have any questions or theories, or think you might have solved any of the ciphers, don't forget to put them in the comments, or even just kind of see how you might interact with people. So, always remember, be the change that you want to see out in the world. It just isn't that hard. And thank you. I will see you again in the next video. Bye-bye.